All right, welcome everyone. It's another homework video from the good old flipped classroom. Brought to us today by tea. It's warm and tasty. This is particularly some red rose tea, so if y'all want to get down on the tea train, you should. All right, progressive era, which we've been looking at for my students in class, has a lot of positive developments when it comes to Americans trying to fix a lot of problems that they see in society. Everything from education to political corruption to the safety of food and drugs. And while this is going on, and in fact, what helps facilitate some of those improvements are some technological advancements that are also happening at the same time, as well as education. And my students will remember when we were talking about how do you fix problems, two of the biggest things that we looked at, A, was making sure the government's on board, but B, making sure that people are educated about the issues so that they can work to change them. So, what's happening in the progressive era? Good question. Let's look. In the cities themselves, which we've been talking about in class, especially with living conditions, and we've mentioned before about skyscrapers growing up, with Carnegie steel allowing for buildings to grow taller than they ever have. But with these buildings being able to grow larger, you have improvements when it comes to housing. Apartment buildings get much larger, thus people aren't living in wooden slums. With the construction of these buildings, they realize, especially when it comes to waste and sewage, it's hard to carry down your waste every day if you live on the 40th floor of an apartment building. So cities start to increase and invest more into sanitation departments, into these sewer systems, which allows these cities to start becoming cleaner. On the right, you'll see an image. This is the Frog Pond in Boston Common. In the cities themselves, people are realizing that, which is great that they can grow up and have more people in them. They also need space. So cities start to design specifically open space areas as parks. In Boston, there's Boston Common, Boston Gardens. New York City of Central Park, that the planners realized that people needed some space outside. So these cities are growing and changing in ways that help it be safer and more enjoyable to live there. And with the cities growing, the need for transportation grows as well. We start to see trolleys. In the top left, you see a trolley here, which mostly are running on electricity, this new form of power that Americans are harnessing, which allows for better transportation within the city. You also see within the cities a number start to dig subway systems. The Boston subway system opens first station in 1897 to put this traffic below the streets. And then in general, you also have train systems that are being developed to draw people from outside of the city and from those suburbs, which also start to grow because people now they've never really had a commute before, ever. So commuting starts to be something that occurs in society. And all of this is really facilitated by, as we mentioned in my class, bridges. We have that first one across the Mississippi River that Carnegie is able to build to show the power of steel. And big ones like the Brooklyn Bridge allow areas that are very close but often would be difficult. You might take a boat in this bottom left one, looking at the Brooklyn Bridge, which are effective but take time. So bridges allow for the transportation of goods and people much easier across these areas, and trains. Brooklyn Bridge had trains running across it 24/7. So with these cities and these large-scale developments, we start to have also some kind of small-scale developments. We see cameras in the bottom right. You have George Eastman, who comes up or starts the Kodak film company, which the big thing with this is it creates a camera that's cheap and affordable. that people can buy. It's $25 back then, which you can see the advertisement down here. It comes with the ability to develop those pictures instantly, which up until this point, to develop a picture took a lot of skill and chemicals and a setup. So Eastman allows photography to become a tool for the people, which, when we're looking at the progressive era, how do we draw attention to problems in society? Photographs are a huge way to do that. So the camera allows journalists and regular people to document and share and inform people about problems that they see. We have printing in the top right. Not only is the paper getting much cheaper, but the machines that are printing newspapers in particular are growing in size and complexity, but that means they're also able to print a lot more papers much quicker. You could buy a newspaper for a penny, which allows this news to spread. That when we have photographs that are showing conditions, when we have news reports that talk about the problems in our food industry, that point out corruption in politics. Without the newspapers, this news and spread of information can't happen as easily, but it helps allow problems to be exposed to the public and people are responsible to be held accountable. And certainly we also have the airplane. Wright brothers, 1903, have their first flight. They only fly a little more than 100 feet for 12 seconds, but this is huge. And by 1920, the United States government has a transcontinental mail service, once again allowing for the spread of information and communication at a much faster rate than had ever happened before. And with this increase in innovation, a lot of it also comes to the schools. States start to pass laws which require children to attend school for a certain amount of time each year. Many states it's between 6 to 12 weeks, and often it's from the ages of 8 to 14. And if you're wondering what do the kids do before that, at this time you also start to see kindergartens growing. That you have children that are going to school much younger, which is allowing their education to develop much quicker. 62% of children in the late 1800s, white children, were going to school, as opposed to only 34% of African American children. So even though education is expanding, increasing, you still start to see this big disparity between white and black children. And with that, you have high school participation growing as well. And these schools in particular are looking at to prepare children to have technical skills, as well as skills that are going to get them jobs. So not only are we looking at how can we train future plumbers and electricians, but also how can we train people that are going to be working in an office. So you start to see this push in education to be supporting this capitalist system, that we need workers in factories and plants and office buildings. Before I guess go on to this slide, we also, the key thing too is you start to see a lot of immigrants that are being pushed into schools, which in many ways is great. Immigrants are not being excluded from education. They're in fact one of the groups that is being pushed towards schools more so than almost anyone else. Which, number one, increases the A, literacy of people, and B, the spread of English. With all these immigrants coming from foreign countries, the language barrier was kind of great in many areas. So with expanding public education, you start to see less divide when it comes to language and culture. Some people push against this because they feel like their own language that they came from is something that they want to cherish. But you also see, even with adult education and night school, adult new immigrants that are coming to learn English as well. And finally, higher education. Not a lot of people are attending college in the early 1900s. Less than 3% of all Americans were attending college. In comparison today, 70% of all Americans attend some sort of post-secondary school. but enrollment starts to rise pretty quickly. And with this an increase in enrollment in college education, African Americans start to say, this is a serious problem, because I was doing the math yesterday. It's less than I think half of a percent of African Americans attended higher education. It was incredibly low, small disappointment, lots of zeros even before you get to the 4. So you have two kind of fields of thought here. Number one, we have Booker T. Washington. He establishes this Tuskegee Institute, and he wants to teach African American students employable skills. He also is looking at a teaching school to get some teaching diplomas for students as well, so that there can be Black educators that can help further the education of more students as well. You also have W.E.B. Du Bois. He disagrees with Booker T. Washington, and he wants to have a more liberal arts education so that there can be leaders in the education field for African Americans. So those are some developments at this time.